Hey everyone, Father Lane here. Welcome to another class in our course on the prophetic literature, and today we have come to Wrigley Field in Chicago, the oldest ballpark in the National League. And it's appropriate because now we're going to talk about what might be the oldest book to be composed in the Old Testament, and what certainly is the earliest set book of the Old Testament prophetic corpus. We're going to be looking at the Book of Amos. But before we do that, we're going to have a little bit of an introduction to the entirety of the minor prophets, and then we'll look into the background and then the theology of Amos. So let's jump into it. We'll begin by talking about the minor prophets, or as they're called in the Hebrew tradition, the Book of the 12. These minor prophets are called minor prophets not because they're insignificant or because they're less important than Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel, or for that matter, Daniel, but rather simply because of the length of their books. There's two traditions. We have the Hebrew tradition represented in the Masoretic Text, and the Greek tradition represented in the Septuagint. It's the same 12 prophets, but they appear in a different order in the two canons. You can see on your screen here, Hosea begins the minor prophets, or the Book of the 12, in either tradition, but then you have Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, and Micah in the 2nd through 6th positions in the Hebrew tradition, whereas the Greek rearranges them to Amos and Micah, which are earlier, they're in the 8th century BC, and then Joel, Obadiah, and Jonah, which occur later, puts them in position 4, 5, and 6. Both canons have the same 6 books that take up positions 7 through 12. The latter half in both canons remains the same. We should point out that this tradition of there being 12 prophets, this tradition of the Book of the 12, predates the time of Jesus by a good 2 centuries. We read in the book of Sirach, or Ben Sira, this deuterocanonical book that appears in Catholic Bibles as well as in the Orthodox tradition. This book, written in the 2nd century BC, says, "Then too the 12 prophets, may their bones flourish with new life where they lie. They gave new strength to Jacob and saved him with steadfast hope." You can see here in this bit from Sirach, which praises the ancestors, praises all of the faithful people of Israel that have come before. The 12 prophets are read as a single unit, and indeed in the Hebrew tradition, the Book of the 12 is considered one book. It's the last book of the posterior prophets, along with Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel. So let's talk about these minor prophets. These minor prophets span the same period of Israel's history that we've been talking about in our last several classes, beginning in the 8th century BC, so before Assyria came to power, before either kingdom had gone into exile. And then the minor prophets span through the 7th, 6th, and 5th centuries. We'll look at how that's happened in our next series of classes. But today I want to talk about the 8th century prophets to the northern kingdom. The first half of the 8th century, under King Jeroboam II, not to be confused with Jeroboam I, who led the northern kingdom into schism, Jeroboam II was king from 786 to 746 BC. So again, this is before Assyria, it's before Tiglath-Pileser III came onto the world scene as a threat in the ancient Near East. Under Jeroboam II, the northern kingdom entered a period of prosperity. It entered a period that ended up being fleeting of affluence. But it was a culture that was able to support literary activity. Scholars believe this is the first time that we're able to see a written literary culture. And 2 prophetic books date to this time period, Amos and Hosea. Very important, these 2 minor prophets, they're the only 2 books that are written to the northern kingdom. Hosea is apparently a northerner. Amos is from the southern kingdom. We're going to see that in just a second. But he is called to prophesy in the northern kingdom. So let's jump into the book of Amos, and we'll begin with the first verse, the superscription, which says, "The words of Amos, who was one of the sheep breeders from Tekoa, which he received in a vision concerning Israel in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah, and in the days of Jeroboam, son of Joash, king of Israel, 2 years before the earthquake." Where is Tekoa? You can see on the map here, it's south of Jerusalem. So Tekoa, where Amos is from, is in the southern kingdom. But he goes to prophesy in Bethel, which you'll remember was one of the 2 sanctuary cities set up by the first King Jeroboam, where they installed the golden calves. So Amos is going to be preaching in the temple at Bethel, the sanctuary where there's a golden calf. And he gets into a bit of a tiff with a northern priest named Amaziah. Amaziah tells Amos to stop preaching there. Amos says the following, "I am not a prophet, nor do I belong to a company of prophets. I am a herdsman and a dresser of sycamores, but the Lord took me from following the flock, and the Lord said to me, 'Go, prophesy to my people Israel.'" So what we can take away from this little fragment is that Amos does not want to be a prophet. He's not doing it for profit. That's kind of a cheesy pun. I don't mean it to be one. He's not trying to earn money as a prophet. He went because the Lord called him, and indeed, he prophesies doom. Lots of doom. As we look at this outline here, the story begins with oracles against the nations, but there's going to be a twist we'll look at. And all of the words that Amos has to say are not good until the very end of the book, when we get a little bit about restoration. So let's look at the theology of Amos. And Amos is best known for these oracles against the nations. Here's a sample. We go to chapter 1, verses 3 and 4. "For 3 crimes of Damascus, and now 4, I will not take it back. Because they thrashed Gilead with sledges of iron, I will send fire upon the house of Hazael, and it will devour the strongholds of Ben-Hadad. 3 crimes of Damascus, and now 4. That's a way of saying, this is the straw that broke the horse's back. 3 crimes, the Lord was merciful, but the 4th is one too many. And in this section, this oracles against the nations, Amos prophesies against Aram, Philistia, Phoenicia, Edom, Ammon, Moab, all of the surrounding nations. Nothing notable there. But then we're in for a surprise in chapter 2, verse 4. "For 3 crimes of Judah, his homeland, and now 4, I will not take it back, because they spurned the instruction, that is Torah, of the Lord, and did not keep his statutes." Trouble's going to befall Judah. "And what's more, for 3 crimes of Israel, and now 4, I will not take it back, because they hand over the just for silver and the poor for a pair of sandals. They trample the heads of the destitute into the dust of the earth, and force the lowly out of the way. Son and father sleep with the same girl, profaning my holy name." And here's the crucial theological point. Israel and Judah are both indicted for failure to keep the covenant. Amos is best remembered for being a prophet of social justice, a prophet who protected the poor, especially against the backdrop of this early 8th century northern kingdom that was enjoying temporary affluence. But here's the key. Covenant violations are an all or nothing proposition. It wasn't just that Israel wasn't good to the poor, it was that Israel violated the covenant as a whole. As we read the book of Amos, there's going to be all sorts of judgment against cultic violations, against violations in terms of human relationships, as well as taking advantage of the poor and the vulnerable. These themes will return in other prophetic books that we'll be looking at in our next few classes. Until then, read well and pray well.